The third area of universal design for learning is action and expression. Action and expression refer to the how of learning. Action and expression are the multiple avenues for displaying what a student knows. Every teacher knows that they need to assess what students understand, but great teachers give a multitude of outlets for students to demonstrate that knowledge. Action and expression lend itself both to autonomy for students, which we covered briefly in the engagement video, but also allows students to overcome physical and cognitive barriers to demonstrate understandings. Assessment and progress monitoring of the goals you and your department have for your class aren't just some inescapable part of teaching. They also represent a chance to see where your students' understanding is and a moment to reflect on your instructional strategies. Think for a moment about how you were assessed during your time in school, whether that be K-12, undergraduate, or graduate degree. Did your teachers offer only written assignments? Did they offer only multiple choice tests? I'm going to assume that you can think of having been assessed in both of those ways, as well as a plenitude of others. Maybe you completed a project, gave an oral speech, or participated in a group or work setting. I also want you to think for a moment about how you felt during those assignments. Are you the kind of person that is cool under pressure and has no problem with classes only offering one or two major tests that make up the majority of your grade? Or were you the kind of student that wanted to run and hide from high-stakes tests? Did you love group work because you could share the responsibility, or did you hate feeling like your grade depended on other people? No matter what kind of assessment you're most familiar and comfortable with, I promise you will have students in your classes that feel very differently. Let's hear from a few professors on their thoughts on assessment.
It was a subject that I enjoyed. Social studies, science, math even, I would, and prepared for it. I enjoyed taking them. I was motivated to do so, but there were plenty of other subjects where I dreaded it.
Papers always paralyzed me, and sometimes still do, even though I've sort of gotten over them and feel like I can put sentences together and synthesize information. But I did like tests. And I think the fact that I like tests makes me also weirdly understand why people don't like tests, because the reason I like them is because I could memorize stuff. And I'm like, gosh, most people are not great at memorizing stuff, and that would be a lot harder.
I don't have an issue with testing, but let me clarify that. Testing that is curriculum-based, I'm not a big fan that the end of the year standardized, normative, summative types of tests have a lot of value, other than to compare kids to each other, which to me doesn't have any instructional value at all. It may have administrative and political value. So that's what I mean in terms of the context of testing and quizzing.
I tend to like to work more as a group because I think then we can build off each other's strengths and supplement the knowledge maybe we don't have, or somebody can say something differently. But I think you build usually a better project with working as a group. And I'm not somebody that needs to have the control. And so it's nice to, have other people doing that. So always working as a group.
In terms of my own learning, when it comes to a professional situation, I prefer group work as in committee work, because you get different people's perspectives. But in my personal life, in terms of my learning, I prefer individual rather than group.
If it's content or a topic that I'm unfamiliar with, or an assignment I'm unfamiliar with, I like engaging in group and hearing other people's perspectives of it, what they understand of it. And then at other times, I think that independent work is important for really genuinely assessing, each student's knowledge and understanding of content. So I think there's a place for both. It kind of just depends on, the topic and the objective.
I prefer working by myself, but I do love, I'm co-teaching a class with a colleague now, and I love those opportunities too. And even though there are times when it's frustrating, because we'll be like, let's do this, no, let's do that. It's still enjoyable because we're social beings. And so primarily we like the company of other people. or usually is a better word. Usually we like the company of other people, but it's not, I think people underestimate the number of skills it takes to work with someone well. And so that's why I assign group work, but I also try to acknowledge, like, I know you probably don't like that you're doing this, but there's reasons for it. So hopefully that comes across.
We all have had negative experiences with assessment, but the purpose of assessment is not to make students' lives difficult and uncomfortable. Assessment should never be a punishment. It is data, and like all data, it should be valid, meaning you are getting correct measurements of your students' understanding, and it should be reliable, meaning that if you gave the assessment again, the results would be the same if the students had the same level of understanding. Think of things this way. If you're a researcher trying to measure how well a group of students can read, to assess this, you have students read a passage out loud. Some professors assume that most college students have average or above average abilities in reading, so you would think that this would be a good measurement. However, when you start listening to students standing up and reading, you'll find that reading fluency scores are all over the map. How could this be? Looking back at the validity and reliability for a second, you might see why. First, for validity. There's an implicit assumption that students who can read, meaning take information from a written source and verbalize it, can then vocalize it in front of other people. Further, there's an assumption that they will perform the same at that reading in front of teachers and peers. Perhaps the student you are researching can read better in the 90th percentile for people their age, but when they're assessed by reading aloud, they perform in the 40th percentile. This is an inaccurate assessment because it's not measuring what it intended. With reliability, there's an assumption that the student's reading is static over time. If the assessment you gave was to read an entire chapter of a textbook aloud, the student might fatigue from the 90th percentile to the 40th percentile by the end of the assessment. You could give the assessment again in 2 weeks, and suddenly the student starts at the 90th percentile and then only drops to the 80th percentile. For your assessment, it looks like the student got better at reading. But in reality, they just got better at doing the assessment. The assessment is unreliable because the results were not replicable. No matter how you slice it, all assessment techniques are not created equal, and all teachers need to have assessments that are accurate indications of if students are meeting the educational aims of the teacher and the class. Therefore, it's essential to give your students multiple means to display what they know. Here are a few instructors that allow for diverse modes of action and expression in their classroom, and the results that they have seen.
I assess student learning obviously by objective quizzes. I assess student learning by the application through their project. I assess student learning mostly from using question and answer and group work, where students basically, as I said before, do their own guided practice. And the best way to assess student learning is through student engagement. And when they're engaged with the content, whether in a pair or in a group, and I can see that, that as well as question and answers are the two ways that I can not only assess learning, but more than that, assess engagement. If I have students that have high engagement in the content, but they aren't doing well on quizzes or tests, I can help them with that. That's a simple thing to fix. But that engagement is something that I want to assess, and that I want to see them at a high level of engagement.
You have to assess them multiple ways. And so in my classes, I have from quizzes, because I do want the students to read the chapters and have that background knowledge to come into class to do the activities. And if you don't have that, it's hard to participate. So I do have quizzes as one method. I have a project in which they do role playing. And so that would be another way to show that they can use the skills that I've taught. I have presentations that they have to do and put those together again to represent another kind of outcome that I want them to have. They write papers, they do reflection papers. And so I think there's a lot of different ways. There's in-class assignments that have to happen where they come in doing something in advance, and that would be another assessment. So there's a variety of ways that I think we have to assess students to really know if they understand what we want them to.
I assess learning in a number of ways, both formally and informally. Informally, I assess it through, discussions, checks for understanding, just questions. You informally are assessing, kind of students' understanding simply by asking questions and seeing how well they respond. And then, of course, formally through quizzes, tests, assignments, and that information, that I gather from those assessments really help me determine the students' understanding, of the content that I'm presenting, how well they understand it. If I need to expand further or provide additional content or instruction to ensure further understanding, if I'm seeing that they don't quite get it, or if they have a misunderstanding. And then it also, it's kind of ongoing assessment or ongoing information for me for how to improve my courses. I keep a teaching journal for every class. And so, if I'm finding out there's a point where, if they've taken an exam or done an assignment and have not done well, I can go back and I follow up on perhaps concepts they misunderstood or didn't quite get, but then I also make note that that might be something I have to change or adapt or modify for the next year.
Whatever it is that comes in, and I have to look at it as a whole, and I see maybe the majority of the students miss something, either depending on where I'm at in the semester, that's going to guide additional instruction that I need to provide the next class. And so I may not have taught something very well, and they, as a group, didn't understand it. I can come back in and reteach and try to come at the knowledge in a different way. Or it would blend into the next semester. When I look at the big picture and I can see students are really struggling with something, then I can, activate more background knowledge because I have that assessment information. So I can say, last year students really struggled with being able to do this. So let me really provide more explicit instruction so you don't miss that and you get this correct. Like, this is the way you need to sequence something, or this is what you really need to focus on. So it can guide me one class, and it can guide me for the next semester.
We try to do a formative assessment in the middle of the semester before the course evaluations, because course evaluations are great for the next time you teach the class, but they don't help you if you're doing something, I won't say wrong, but if there's more you could be doing within the semester, there are ways to do that. So this semester, one of the quizzes really wasn't about the reading. It was about what's going well, what's not going well, what can we do better to support you, and we try to read all of those. We had our GA compile them into columns so we could. I actually kind of ignored the what's going well for now, because it does, like, if it's going well, I don't need to think about it. I need to think more about the, like, what's not working great, or what could we be doing more of. We also put a question about who their favorite teacher was, and the responses were amazing. But I use that, and we try to incorporate it almost as soon as we can. There's some things that are very flexible during the course of a semester, some things that are less flexible. So the papers, the finals, you sort of take those scores and hopefully it's a bell curve. Like, I hope some people get, A's. I expect people to get B's. And I hope no one does super poorly, but, occasionally someone does. But that's all part of this bell curve of what's expected in any given class.
One of the things I did at the end of every class, so I tell students, get out a piece of paper. Okay, and I want you to answer these two questions. What was the main point that you learned from class today? And what was the main unanswered question that you have? And I used that for many, many, many years. And that would tell me what they got out of the class. And that would tell me, okay, I'm focusing on certain things over others, so I may need to broaden my focus. And when I see what their main unanswered question is, they group together. And then I would put those questions that are similar on a PowerPoint slide. And at the beginning of the following class, we'd go through each of them. That was a way that I did that for many, many years. I do that sometimes depending on the class now, but it's become so second nature that I'm pretty aware of what I'm doing as a college instructor. I've been doing it for 31 years.
I hope more people know that, one, you can do your own evaluation at any point in time. So thinking about like that midpoint and that endpoint, you can add questions to those course evaluations. Like they are editable by us up to a certain point in the semester. And so if there is something you really want to know about how students feel about certain things, you can actually add it to the course evaluation. I feel like people get caught up on having a right answer to something. And there's definitely right answers to certain questions, but I think if you're only asking questions that have right answers, you're not getting at higher order thinking. Because problem solving is higher order thinking for the class I'm teaching right now. It's sort of what I hope people are learning how to do. And there's not ever a right answer. So I may be looking for a particular answer. And if I close off to other options, I might be missing a really great idea that someone had that just didn't fit within my paradigm or my framework.
Assessment is critical for not only assessing students' knowledge and understanding of the content, but also the effectiveness of your instruction.
What I tell them instead is when a kid misbehaves, ask yourself, what is she communicating to you? What does he or she want? Every time a student, when you're as a teacher, every time a student behaves, he or she is telling you something, verbally and or non-verbally. So don't take misbehavior personally. Be personal with kids, but don't personalize their behavior. And they will communicate to you on how to deal with them effectively if you're good observers and listeners. But we aren't really good observers. We think we're watching everything, but we're really not because we have a routine way of looking. And so that interferes with us being able to assess students' behaviors, whether they're academic or social behaviors.
That you have to look at it in different ways. You can't just have one way to assess your students. Like I said, I'm horrible at testing, and if that's the only thing you relied on was a multiple choice test, that's not going to give you everything. That can be a piece of assessment, but you have to have a variety of different ways to assess your students. And so thinking about your learning outcomes and then matching those with an assessment that is going to give you that information and making sure that you're addressing all of the different kinds of learners in your classroom.